Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you to the co-founders and to Together for inviting me along. My name is Matt Goodwin. It's great to see so many familiar faces. Some of you I know from previous events, some of you I know from the Substack. For those of you who don't know, I've started a platform which has really been railing against what I think is a narrow, stifling orthodoxy that we can all feel in this country. About 60% of voters, and I poll them every week, will now say that they feel they can't really say what they think because they're scared of what might happen if they do so. About a quarter of university students in this country say they cannot share their real views in my lectures and seminars, and those of my colleagues, because they're scared of what might happen if they do so. So I started writing about this to try and, I guess, give voice to maybe people like yourselves who feel like the world has gone a little bit crazy. This week we've been producing new research on the pushback against net zero, showing why many voters actually rather like this growing pushback against net zero. And I've also walked people through the fight that we've been involved with in the universities, where the attack on free speech and free expression has been particularly strong. And over the last 18 months, a few of us have been pushing for the Higher Education Free Speech Act, which you may or may not know is now in place and defends academics who might pursue contrarian, unorthodox, non-conformist views, and who now cannot be discriminated against for sharing those views on campus. And the Higher Education Free Speech Act and the Higher Education Free Speech Act, even though it's made us a lot of enemies in higher education, and we were very loath to turn to the state for answers to that question, but universities were not reforming themselves. They couldn't be trusted to defend free speech and free expression. And that's become the first piece of legislation that we're aware of in the Western world, which is now proactively defending the likes of Kathleen Stock, the likes of Nigel Biggar, the likes of Jordan Peterson, the likes of Noah Carl, the likes of Joe Phoenix and others who do want to take on radical ideas, who do want to challenge some of the beliefs that are descending across our institutions. So if you're interested, you can get a discount on my Twitter just for the delegates here, and please do join us at mattgoodwin.org. What I wanted to talk about, though, was this new elite. And when I was asked to come and speak, I said, look, really, if you want to fight back, you have to really get at the epicenter of what's going on. What's at the epicenter is a new ruling class in this country. And this is not a conspiracy. It's simply the way in which the elite has changed over the last 50 years. And what we are living through is the rise of what I've called the new elite, a new elite graduate class that lives in the cities, university towns, comes from a very privileged background, filled with people who have the same social characteristics, that have the same ideology, who disproportionately dominate the institutions, not just the political institutions, also the media, creative industries, cultural institutions, and which increasingly look down on those who hold different political beliefs to their own. And the evidence for this is overwhelming, as we've seen today with GB News, but we've seen during COVID, we've seen in our debates over globalization, immigration, free speech, sex and gender. The new elite who dominate the institutions are the most likely to unfriend people on social media who they disagree with. They're the most likely to block people who they disagree with. They're the most likely to say they would feel unhappy if their son or daughter married somebody who held different political beliefs to their own. And they're most likely to display a type of class prejudice that they would not tolerate for a minute if it was directed towards any other group in society. And that's what we saw in the aftermath of the Brexit referendum, when millions of our fellow citizens were openly derided for being ignorant, bigots and gammons and so on. And over the last half century, essentially what's happened is that new elite have consolidated their position. They've taken over the epicenters of economic growth. They've taken over the big cities and the university towns. They've rewired the higher education system around their own group, so it only benefits their own group. Their social networks have become much more homogenous. Mike Savage at the University of Manchester has shown how the new elite are the most likely to marry other members of their group and are the least likely to socialize with people from different backgrounds. And you can see this in areas like the media, for example, where the media is now dominated by people who come from the same backgrounds, who have the same views, and who increasingly want to impose these political projects on everybody else. And we've seen that with the political and cultural and economic revolution that we're all living through today. And I talk a lot about what I call the revolution because that's exactly what it is. We have an elite consensus that serves 20% of the country and which ignores 80% of the country. That is what is happening. We have a political project that is geared around a commitment to hyper-globalization, to deregulating the economy, to hollowing out the British economy, to serving big business, to use mass migration in order to undermine the position of British workers, in order to keep the economy dependent upon cheap workers from abroad and consumption, a project which is hollowing out national democracy, which sent powers up to the European Union, and when that became no longer possible, continues to send powers out to unelected quangos, unelected technocrats, a politics in Westminster which has become indistinguishable, whether it's on the left or the right, and which has become very dismissive of people who hold different political viewpoints. And if you look, for example, at the latest research which was released last week, the British Social Attitude Survey, it shows that this consensus really only speaks to 1 in 5 voters, leaving many other people with a palpable sense that they're not even in the national conversation anymore. They're not even in the public square anymore. And even worse than that, when they do voice their views, when they do challenge this very narrow elite consensus, they're either silenced, as Julia said, or even worse, they're stigmatized as being socially unacceptable, as being somehow problematic, as being illegitimate, as being beyond the pale, outside of the realm of acceptable discourse. So what do we need to do about it? What I think we need to do about it is continue to build an alternative ecosystem. For the first time in history, we now have the ability to cultivate and support a generation of writers and activists who are completely independent from the legacy institutions, who are on YouTube and Substack and in organizations like Together. We don't need the legacy institutions to build that alternative ecosystem anymore. And we need to reform the institutions. We need to break up the legacy media. That's why it's critical that organizations like GB News and Talk TV and others are present in the media landscape. We need to break up the institutions. We need to reform the universities, because the kids who are coming into my lecture theatre this week, who were born in 2005, those students are not being exposed to the full range of ideas and beliefs that exist in wider society. They're certainly not being taught the importance of free speech and free expression. So we need to reform the institutions. We need to ensure that there's a wider range of voices within our national conversation. And as Alan said, that has to start at the grassroots, and it has to start with organizations like Together and similar organizations who are able to take on this elite consensus and mount an opposition to it from the grassroots. Because if polling voters has shown me anything over the last few years, sitting in focus groups every week with voters has shown me anything over the last few years, it's that much of the country feels exactly the same way as you do. Much of the country much of the country, firstly, is not even participating in politics because they've given up. That's what was so unique about Brexit. 2.5 million people came back into politics because irrespective of what they thought about the EU, they could sense here was an opportunity to shake things up. You know, we need to keep pulling those people back into politics. Over 60% of people in this country say Labour and the Conservatives do not represent people like me. They don't speak for people like me. And the vast majority of people out there no longer trust the established institutions for good reason, because the last 20 years have been a catalogue of elite failure. Elite failure over COVID and the lockdowns, elite failure over migration and globalization, elite failure over foreign policy disasters, elite failure over the global financial crash, elite failure over the failure of elites to see inflation coming and the cost of living crisis coming, and yet still we're told to listen to the same people and to respect the authority of the same people. And the vast majority of voters out there are looking for something different. They're looking for a radical alternative that is willing to take on the elite consensus, not in a misogynistic, irresponsible, xenophobic way, but in a responsible, mature, competent, coherent, and credible way that connects with the aspirations and the wishes of the vast majority of voters out there. And I just think the only thing missing in this country right now is a vehicle that is actually willing and able to step into that space. And maybe you will be that vehicle. Who knows? Thank you.